Boker Tov, everybody. Welcome to another session of Chai There with Rabbi Leah. Today is Wednesday, the 22nd of April. Hard to believe that this month is moving along so rapidly, although some days it doesn't feel like it's going so quickly. I'd like to begin with singing Moda Ani Lefanecha. I am grateful before you, God, that I woke up this morning, that I'm having a relatively good hair day, even though it has grown out so much that I'm dying for a haircut just like everybody else. But be patient. We're getting there, God willing. And in the meantime, we're staying safe and healthy. So, if you are a gentleman, you are going to sing Modeh Ani Lefanecha. And if you are a lady, you are going to sing Moda Ani Lefanecha. And then we'll get into our lesson. Moda Ani Lefanecha. Melech Chai V'Kayam. שהחזרת בי נשמתי בחמלה, בחמלה, רבה אמונתך, רבה אמונתך. So I decided to change my venue a little bit. I'm now sitting at my breakfast counter. I had a delicious breakfast this morning. I made myself challah French toast with bananas and peanut butter because I'm having this craving for comfort food. And if you want to know how you make vegan French toast, I'll tell you, you use an egg substitute, and believe it or not, it tastes just like French toast. But a couple weeks ago, I told you about this wonderful expression that the rabbis had that said, Mishneh hamakom u mishneh mazal, which means change your seat or change your place and change your luck. So maybe by sitting at my breakfast counter with my fridge behind me and my pantry and the door to my bedroom and getting out of my dining room for a little bit, I'll change not only my mazel, but everybody's mazel. So last week, I started talking to you about one of my favorite subjects, Pirkei Avot. And I made a number of phone calls to residents. Last Friday during the power outage, I got a few of you, and then again over the weekend, and I got some feedback that some folks had missed a couple of these shows, and they wanted for me to go back and reteach what I had taught. And so, since I think that repetition is a good thing, I hope you won't mind if I go back and reteach some of these things about Pirkei Avot. So, in order to do that, I have to give you a little bit of history of what happened after the Bible was written. Because the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, was just the very beginning of our sacred literature. And we have volumes and volumes and volumes of literature that was written after the Torah and after the Bible, much of it commentary and discussions among the rabbis and so on, from which we get our law, our Jewish law. And the Mishnah was the first major work of rabbinic literature that came after the Torah. There were other things written, but it was the first major piece of rabbinic literature. And the reason it came to be is that when the temple was destroyed in the year 70 of the Common Era, a decision had to be made. What was going to happen to this Israelite religion? We no longer had the house where God dwelled. We no longer had a priestly cult, and we had a dilemma. And the dilemma was, what do we do now? Are we going to go the way of the Hittites and the Amalekites and the Jebusites and the Ishmaelites and the cellulites? Sorry about that. Or are we going to recreate a religion that can still be viable now and in the future? Because the people never gave up hope that they would come back from their exile, back to Jerusalem, and back to their way of life. And so they had to have a way of maintaining all the information uh, in some way. So the Mishnah, which was redacted around the 3rd century, and by redacted I mean actually written down. Prior to that time, it was an oral tradition. And the word Mishnah actually means repetition, because the way in which the material was remembered before it was written down was through memorization. Now, the Mishnah is not a small volume. There's a lot of information in there. So how does one remember that? Well, you don't do it all by yourself. Little bits of it are divided up amongst many, 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 many people, and the information is memorized in that way. And by doing that, each person has their own tiny assignment, so to speak. And then when it's redacted, when it's compiled into a codex, into a book, or into a scroll, it's easier to get it down into a written form. So the individual who was responsible for taking this oral tradition and having it redacted was a fellow by the name of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, also known as Judah the Prince, Yehuda the Prince. And in rabbinic literature, when we read about him and we read the name rabbi, that's who we're referring to. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. He was that important. So we taught and repeated this oral tradition in a way in which people would remember it and then eventually write it down, because again, they were always refocusing on the eventual rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem, coming back from exile from Babylonia, and being able to re-implement the priestly cult and everything that had existed. So it's really the first major collection of the oral Torah. There are tractates in the Mishnah. There are several tractates in the Mishnah. And in fact, let me look and see. There are 6 orders, and each order of the Mishnah has several tractates. So an order would be like a big unit, and then the tractates are the little sections in each of the units. So I'll get to what we're going to be studying and where that fits in the Mishnah in just a moment. Again, the primary concern of the rabbis was that the details of these oral traditions were going to be lost due to persecution, due to the fact that people were not permitted to study. And so they had to be remembered and written down in some way. And that's how we ended up with the Mishnah. Now, last week, I recommended to you 3 different books. And I'm going to give them to you now, and then I'll give them to you again at the end of the half hour. And I think that there are 3 books that are very, very readable. 2 of them are nonfiction that talk about Mishnah, and specifically one about Pirkei Avot. And then the third is a novel that I think you'd be very much interested in reading. If you haven't read it already, many of you probably have. It's a wonderful book. So let me give you the names of those in case you would like to study a little bit more on your own. The first book is called Pirkei Avot, and that is edited by Olitzky, Olitzky. I think the publisher is either the URJ Press or the CCAR Press. But for those of you who are going to look it up, if you want to go on Amazon, just type in Pirkei Avot, Pirke, second word Avot, Avot. Look for the one that was edited by Rabbi Kerry Olitzky, and that's the one you want. Okay. The second book is called Back to the Sources. Back to the Sources, edited by Barry Holtz, Holtz. The book is about 1.5 inches, maybe 2 inches thick. It's not the kind of thing you're just going to want to sit down and read from cover to cover unless you're having trouble sleeping. Actually, it's not that boring. But what the book does is it takes you through all of rabbinic literature, and it starts actually with Torah, Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, and then gets into Mishnah, Talmud, Shulchan Aruch, the commentaries, Tosefta. So if you've ever heard of any of these things like Shulchan Aruch, what the heck is Shulchan Aruch? This book is a wonderful, wonderful resource to help you out with those, with answers to those questions. I'm not going to do a course in rabbinic literature right now because I really want to study Pirkei Avot, and we're going to be studying it for a very specific reason. But I think that this book that's edited by Barry Holtz is a great book that you can use as a reference so that when somebody says to you, well, you know, it says in Pesikta de Rav Kahana, you can look up what the heck is Pesikta de Rav Kahana, and you will impress all your friends and families, and you'll have all these amazingly scholarly things to talk about at the next cocktail party you go to, which will hopefully be sooner rather than later. So that's the second book. And the third book is a novel, which was, believe it or not, one of the reasons why I became a rabbi. After my bat mitzvah, when I was 37 years old, I continued to study with my adult B'nai Mitzvah class. And one of the books we read was this book. And you hear this term, the rabbis, the rabbis, the rabbis. Well, who are these rabbis? Well, they were real flesh and blood men. They were not a figment of our imaginations. They were not fiction. And I read this book, and it has a wonderful, wonderful depiction of the personalities of these rabbis. And the book is called As a Driven Leaf. And I know that many of you may have read it already, but it's a book that I go back to and read every couple of years because I really find that what it does is it humanizes these rabbis so that we can really get a sense of who they were, what their personalities were like, and so on. And you're going to read names of these rabbis. It's a story about a rabbi by the name of Elisha ben Abuya, who was an apostate. He was a Jew. He was a rabbi, part of the Sanhedrin, and he became an apostate. He turned against Judaism. And it's a true story, but it is historical fiction. So it's written in a way that is very entertaining. You learn a lot. The book was written by Rabbi, oh my gosh, I'm having one of those mind issues. I've read the book 1,000 times. I know his name, and it'll come to me, or I'll look it up while I am talking to you. This is what's known as vamping. I'm vamping right now. I am trying to play for time. But I'll get the name for you. And here we go. I'm going to look it up right now. Um, the rabbi who wrote this book, I cannot believe I forgot the name, died actually prior to the book being written. So it was published posthumously. And Milton Steinberg, Rabbi Milton Steinberg. Sadly, he died in his early 50s. The book was published after his death. And the most recent edition actually has a beautiful preface, a beautiful introduction by his son, and by others as well. So, as a driven leaf, Rabbi Milton Steinberg, and you'll really get a sense of who these rabbis were. Okay, so what are we going to study from the Mishnah, and why are we going to study it? We're going to study something from the Mishnah known as Pirkei Avot. Pirkei Avot, also known as the chapters of the fathers or the ethics of the fathers, is a compilation of ethical teachings and maxims by the rabbis of the Mishnaic period. And remember, I told you that the Mishnah is comprised of orders, which are major segments, and the order in which Pirkei Avot appears is called Nezikin, and it is the fourth big section of the Mishnah. And Nezikin means damages, and interestingly enough, this is the section that talks about criminal and civil law and the functioning of the courts and how oaths work when one makes an oath, what is one liable for, and so on and so forth. It's damages. Nizikin is damages. So this is the fourth of 6 orders that are in the Mishnah. And this particular order of Nezikin has 10 chapters, and Pirkei Avot is chapter 9. So now you kind of know where it falls in the Mishnah. It is in the fourth of 7 orders, and it is towards the end. It is the second to the last tractate of the 10 tractates in that order of the Mishnah. It is the only tractate in the entire Mishnah that deals solely with ethical and moral principles. There's very little halakha. There's very little law found in Pirkei Avot. This was the opportunity for the ancient rabbis to wax eloquent. So they all had these pithy little sayings that they loved to express. And, you may have had a relative who was known for saying something. It was like their catchphrase or their favorite expression, something like that. So this was an opportunity for these rabbis who were otherwise consumed with mitzvot, with laws and how things should be done. Because remember, they were trying to maintain all this information so that eventually, when the temple was rebuilt, they could go right back to what life was like before it had been destroyed in the year 70. So these were the early rabbis, the rabbis of the first several centuries of the Common Era, from 100 to about 300 of the Common Era. So we're talking about a group of rabbis who were around, some of them at the same time that the historical Jesus was alive. And the word avot is a word that you might know because it is part of the Amidah. Remember, we say Ada, we say Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu, Eloheinu, Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov. These are our avot. These are our ancestors, or our forefathers and our foremothers. So avot means our ancestors or fathers, if you want to use the gendered word, but it can also be understood as when something is a father, they're the principal person. And so we can also understand what's in Pirkei Avot as the principle, the fundamental principles of moral and ethical behavior. This particular tractate of the Mishnah has 5 chapters. So we're going to be looking at 5 chapters. And I'm going to look at the first chapter in depth because I really think that that's the one that's going to give you such a great sense of who these rabbis were. The first chapter starts with Moses receiving the Torah at Mount Sinai. And then it's going to describe how it is that that Torah got all the way from Moses to me and to you. So why are we still studying this thing today? Now, it's important to note that Pirkei Avot is a tractate of the Mishnah. It's a that is studied between Passover and Shavuot. So Passover was the first night was on the 8th of April, and there is a 7-week period of time between Pesach, when we left Egypt, when we were redeemed from Egypt, and 7 weeks later to the day, on that 50th day, 7 times 7 is 49, and then on the 50th day, which will be the 5th of Sivan, we arrived at the foot of Mount Sinai and we got the Torah, and that is the holiday, the festival that we know as Shavuot or Shavuos, for those of you who prefer the Yiddish. So it is customary to study Pirkei Avot during this period of time. And there are other people who then study Pirkei Avot between Shavuos, and Rosh Hashanah, which is more than 6 weeks, and or more than 5 weeks rather. And I mentioned there are 5 chapters, so there's a little bit of repetition that goes on in there as well. But it is customary because we are getting ourselves ready through listening to and reading and discussing these morals and these ethics of the rabbis to that ultimate event where we're going to stand at the foot of Mount Sinai and we're going to end up getting the real how-to book, how to live a moral and ethical life, namely the Torah. And so that is why it's customary to study Pirkei Avot during this period of time. And I have parts of each of the 10 chapters, or excuse me, each of the 5 chapters that I really love. But I think including this first chapter, but I think that until we get through this first chapter, we really need to understand the transmission of how this all got from Moses to you and me here in the 21st century. So that is what the first of the 5 chapters focuses on, what we call Kabbalat Torah, the transmission of the Torah and the receiving of the Torah. I have a puppy who is having his morning cough over here. The second chapter focuses on the students of Yochanan ben Zakkai, and I'm not going to go into that and belabor that because we'll talk about that more. The next 2 chapters, the 3rd and the 4th chapter, are thematic, and they have various sayings that are attributed to the various rabbis. And I promise you, you are going to hear rabbis' names that you are familiar with, that you've heard possibly all your life. 2 of the most famous being Hillel and Shammai, but other rabbis that you've heard of as well. And we're going to be able to get to know a little bit more about their personalities by the kinds of things they say in these statements. So chapters 3 and 4 are thematic. And then chapter 5 kind of departs from that organization and has mostly anonymous sayings that are structured around numerical lists. And there's a reason for that too. So we'll have a chapter, for example, where everything is the number 4. There are 4 kinds of people. There are 4 kinds of sages. There are 4 kinds of students. There are, and so on. Or we'll have, there are 7 things, or there are 10 things. And there's a reason for that. And that is that it's easier to remember things when they're numbered. And if you are handing down an oral tradition that you want to have remembered before you have an opportunity to write it down, you better have some sort of mnemonic device that's going to help you remember these things. And we've talked before about how setting things to music often helps people remember because, kids learn ABCs. It's a lot easier when you have a melody to sing it to than just trying to remember it. And similarly, when you can remember lists of things, it's easier. So we will get into this 5th chapter that has a whole different bunch of lists of numerical lists of things, and they become easier to remember that way. Some of them have no direct connection to ethics necessarily, but they're just fun, pithy, interesting things. And then the last 4 chapters of that particular, or the last 4 paragraphs rather of that particular chapter, chapter 5, return to the format of the moral sayings of the rabbis. Now, in most printed editions of Pirkei Avot, you will also find a 6th chapter called Kinyan Torah, which is acquisition of the Torah. And that's also found in another Mishnah or another tractate in the Mishnah. But it's placed there because its content is appropriate for this particular type of rabbinic literature. And it's very similar to Avot, and it focuses on Torah study. And it also gives you another chapter to study during these 2 periods of time from Pesach to Shavuos, and from Shavuos to Rosh Hashanah. So usually tractates of the Mishnah have accompanying commentaries. So you can read a tractate of the Mishnah, and then you can go and look at the commentaries. You could see what other rabbis' comments were. But that's not the case for Avot. Avot has no expanded version that serves as a kind of a commentary, except for one, and that is called Avot de Rabbi Natan. And I'll let you in on a little secret. I spent the summer between my 2nd and 3rd year of rabbinical school doing a self-study with my beloved professor, Rabbi Rick Saracen at the Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati, where I translated the Hebrew of Avot de Rabbi Natan into English. There are 2 different parts. There's part A and part B. And it was a wonderful exercise. I learned a lot. My Mishnaic Hebrew got really, really good. My Aramaic started to get a little better. It's still not great, but it was fun to see the commentary on Avot. So that's all that I'm going to cover today. And tomorrow morning, Thursday morning, when I pick up on Pirkei Avot, we'll talk more about what's involved in it, and then we're going to get into learning about the rabbis and learning about what they had to say, and you're going to be amazed to find, excuse me, how many of these sayings you already know, but probably had no idea where they came from, who said them, or why they were there. So I want to wish you all lehitraot. Have a wonderful day. Excuse me, I need a sip of my morning tea. going to say lehitraot. I will see you tomorrow morning, same time, 9:30 for Chai There with Rabbi Leah. So don't forget to tune in. Take care, everybody. Have a fabulous day. Bye-bye.